The 800-pound grizzly burst through Sarah's kitchen window at 3:47 a.m., glass exploding like shrapnel as massive claws raked across her grandfather's antique table. But this wasn't nature gone wild. This was calculated revenge. The tranquilizer, dart protruding from the bear's flank, told her everything she needed to know. Her billionaire neighbor had finally made his move. What Marcus Blackwood didn't count on was the body camera hidden in Sarah's barn, the one that captured him releasing the drugged predator onto her property. Now, as sirens wailed in the distance and the bear collapsed in her living room, Chen realized she wasn't just fighting for her ranch anymore. She was fighting for her life. And the evidence in her trembling hands was about to turn the hunter into the hunted. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered fence posts of Chen Ranch, but Sarah Chen barely noticed the beauty of another Montana dawn. Her calloused hands gripped the steering wheel of her grandfather's old pickup as she bounced down the dirt road toward the main house, her mind churning with numbers that refused to add up in her favor. 47,000, she muttered, the words bitter in her mouth. That's what she owed in back taxes, medical bills from her father's final months, and the mountain of debt that had accumulated like snow during a brutal winter. $47,000 might as well have been $47 million for all the chance she had of raising it. Her phone buzzed on the cracked dashboard. Another call from Marcus Blackwood's attorney. Sarah let it go to voicemail, just like the previous 8 calls this week. She knew what they wanted. Her signature on papers that would transform her family's 100-year legacy into another luxury development for California tech executives seeking authentic Montana experiences. The irony wasn't lost on her that the man trying to steal her ranch had made his billions creating virtual reality worlds, while she was desperately trying to hold on to something real. Sarah parked near the barn and climbed out, her boots crunching, on the frost-covered gravel. The October air bit at her face, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of an early winter. Her breath formed small clouds as she walked toward the corral, where Thunder, her grandfather's old quarter horse, waited for his morning grain. "Morning, big guy," she said, running her hand along Thunder's neck. The horse nickered softly, pressing his muzzle against her palm. At least Thunder didn't care about tax liens or foreclosure notices. The sound of expensive tires on gravel made her look up. A black Mercedes SUV with tinted windows rolled down her driveway, flanked by 2 smaller vehicles. Sarah's jaw tightened. Blackwood never came alone anymore. Not since their last confrontation 3 months ago when she'd told him exactly where he could shove his offers. The SUV stopped 20 feet away, and Marcus Blackwood emerged like a general surveying conquered territory. Everything about him screamed money and power, from his perfectly tailored outdoor jacket that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment to the Rolex catching the morning light on his wrist. At 55, Blackwood had the kind of artificially preserved youth that only came from personal trainers, nutritionists, and the best cosmetic procedures money could buy. 2 men in suits flanked him, while a third remained by the vehicles, clearly security, though they tried to look casual. A woman with a tablet and severe expression completed the entourage. "Sarah," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "You look tired. This can't be easy for you." "Get off my property, Marcus." Sarah's voice was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd faced down charging bulls and winter storms, but something about Blackwood's presence always made her feel like prey. "I'm trying to help you," he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. "My latest offer is more than generous. $3.5 million for the ranch, plus I'll cover all your outstanding debts and give you a year to relocate. You could start fresh anywhere you want." "I don't want to start fresh. I want to stay right here." Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Sarah, be realistic. You're drowning in debt. The county's going to foreclose in 60 days anyway. At least this way you walk away with something." The county can't foreclose. I've got a payment plan. Had a payment plan, the woman with the tablet interrupted. I'm Jennifer Walsh, county assessor. Your payment was due yesterday. You're now in default. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. That's not possible. I made that payment 2 weeks ago. Walsh consulted her tablet with the dispassionate efficiency of someone delivering a death sentence. No record of any payment. Your account shows a balance of $47,612 now with additional penalties, bringing it to $52,000. You can't just add $5,000 in penalties overnight. Actually, we can, Walsh said. Emergency assessment fees, administrative costs, late payment penalties. It's all quite legal, I assure you. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. The payment had been made. She had the confirmation number written on the calendar in her kitchen. But looking at the satisfied expression on Blackwood's face, she realized with sickening clarity that her payment had somehow vanished into the bureaucratic maze of county government. You son of a bitch, she whispered. Blackwood's mask of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing something predatory underneath. Careful, Sarah. False accusations can be expensive in court. What court? You own the judges, too. I don't own anyone, Blackwood said. I simply know how to work within the system, how to make things happen efficiently. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You have 48 hours before the county files for immediate seizure. Sign the papers now, and this all goes away. Fight it, and you'll lose everything anyway, but with legal fees that'll follow you for years. Sarah stared at him, seeing her grandfather's ghost in every weathered board of the barn, hearing her father's voice in the wind through the pines. 4 generations of her family had worked this land, survived droughts and floods, market crashes and personal tragedies. The idea of surrendering it to this vulture made her physically sick. No, she said. No? I said no. Get off my property. Blackwood's face hardened. You're making a mistake, Sarah. I've been trying to handle this amicably, but there are other ways to motivate a sale. Is that a threat? It's a promise, he said, then caught himself, the practiced smile returning. I promise you'll regret being stubborn about this. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Sarah? You might want to check your insurance policy. I'd hate for anything unfortunate to happen before the foreclosure. The caravan of vehicles departed in a cloud of dust, leaving Sarah standing alone in her yard with her world crumbling around her. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and dialed her bank. First Montana Bank, this is Derek. Derek, it's Sarah Chen. I need to check on a payment I made 2 weeks ago to the county assessor's office. Sure thing, Sarah. Let me pull that up. Here it is. Payment processed October 15th for $47,612. Confirmation number 78432 Alpha 9. Went through without any problems. Sarah's blood ran cold. The payment had gone through, which meant Walsh was lying, or someone had made her payment disappear. In a county where Blackwood had donated millions to local campaigns and infrastructure projects, she had a pretty good idea which was more likely. Derek, I need you to fax me a copy of that transaction record immediately and print backup copies for my files. Already on it. You sound worried. Is everything okay? I don't know yet. Sarah spent the rest of the morning on the phone with lawyers who couldn't afford to take her case and county officials who suddenly couldn't find any record of her payment. By noon, she'd confirmed what she already suspected. She was fighting a rigged system with empty pockets. She was feeding the horses when she heard the first engine. Not the purr of expensive vehicles this time, but the rumble of heavy machinery. Sarah ran to the front of her property and felt her heart sink. 3 trucks were parked on the county road just outside her fence line. Workers were unloading surveying equipment and stakes. Hey, she called out, jogging toward the fence. What are you doing? A man in a hard hat looked up from his clipboard. County assessment. We're surveying this property for development potential. You can't survey my property without my permission. We're on county land, ma'am. The road easement extends 30 feet from the fence line. Sarah knew enough about property law to recognize a technicality when she heard one, but surveying the easement was just the beginning. Once they had their measurements and soil samples, environmental assessments would follow, then infrastructure planning. The machinery of development would grind forward whether she consented or not. Her phone rang. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Sarah, this is Jim Holcomb." She recognized the name, one of her few remaining neighbors who hadn't sold, out to Blackwood's development company. "Jim, what's going on?" "I'm calling to warn you. My cattle got out last night. Every damn gate on my property was opened, and someone cut my fence line in 3 places. Lost 2 bulls and a dozen head, of prime breeding stock. They're scattered across 2 counties now." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Oh, God, Jim." Sheriff Tom Bradley had seen a lot of things in his 30 years of law enforcement, but he'd never seen a grizzly bear passed out in someone's living room with a tranquilizer dart hanging from its flank like a bizarre Christmas ornament. "Jesus Christ, Sarah," he muttered, stepping carefully around the massive animal while his deputy took photographs. "You sure know how to make a mess." Sarah stood in her destroyed kitchen, surveying the carnage with surprisingly steady hands. Every cabinet door hung open or lay shattered on the linoleum floor. Her grandmother's china collection was now decorative rubble. The refrigerator had been knocked over, its contents forming a spreading pool of milk and broken glass. "I didn't make this mess, Tom. Someone used that bear as a weapon." Deputy Martinez looked up from his camera. "Ma'am, grizzlies don't usually wander this far down from the high country this time of year, and they definitely don't come with pharmaceutical accessories. That's what I'm trying to tell you." Sarah gestured at the dart. "Someone drugged this animal and dumped it on my property." Sheriff Bradley crouched next to the bear, careful not to disturb any evidence. The tranquilizer dart was professional. Grade, the kind used by Fish and Game for relocations, not something a civilian could acquire easily. "Any idea who might want to do something like this?" "Marcus Blackwood." Bradley's expression tightened. He'd grown up in this county back, when it was still ranchers and loggers instead of tech billionaires and their vacation empires. He'd watched good people lose their land to developers who fought dirty and bought their way out of consequences. "That's a serious accusation, Sarah. You got any proof?" Sarah's heart raced. This was it, the moment that would either save her ranch or destroy any credibility she had left. "Maybe. I installed security cameras 6 months ago. If someone brought that bear onto my property, I've got it on film." "Well, let's go take a look." They walked to the barn through the crisp night air, their breath forming clouds in the beam of Bradley's flashlight. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she unlocked the door and led them to a small office space her grandfather had used for bookkeeping. The computer setup looked modest, just a basic PC connected to 4 cameras, but the hard drive had enough storage for 2 weeks of continuous recording. Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up the footage from the camera that faced her access road. "The attack happened around 9:30. Let me back it up to here." The screen showed her property in grainy night vision, eerily quiet except for the distant shapes of her horses moving in the pasture. Sarah fast-forwarded through several minutes of nothing, then suddenly stopped. "There," she whispered. A large truck appeared on the access road, moving without headlights. Sarah enhanced the image as much as the cheap system would allow, but the license plate remained frustratingly unclear. The truck stopped just outside the range of her camera, and 2 figures climbed out. "Can you make out their faces?" Deputy Martinez asked. "Not from this angle, but watch what they do." The figures moved to the back of the truck, and even through the poor video quality, it was clear they were handling something large and unwieldy. One of them appeared to be holding what looked like a tranquilizer gun. "Son of a bitch," Bradley muttered. "They're actually doing it." The footage showed the 2 men struggling with their cargo for several minutes before disappearing from the camera's view. 20 minutes later, they returned without their burden and drove away, still using no lights. "That's not enough," Sarah said, frustration evident in her voice. "You can't identify anyone from this footage." "Maybe not from this camera," Martinez said. "But you said you have 4 of them?" Sarah pulled up the other camera feeds. The second camera showed nothing useful. It faced the wrong direction. The third camera, positioned near her horse corral, had captured the truck passing by, but from an even worse angle. But the fourth camera, the one she'd almost forgotten about, faced her barn from the house. And as Sarah rewound the footage, she realized it had captured something that would change everything. "Look at this," she breathed. At 9:47 p.m., clear as day and infrared, the camera had recorded 2 men dragging an unconscious grizzly bear across her yard. But more importantly, one of the men had looked directly up at the barn during their struggles with the animal. Sarah enhanced the image, and a face emerged from the pixelated darkness. Rugged features, a distinctive scar across the left cheek, and the kind of tactical gear that screamed private security. "I know that guy," Bradley said grimly. "That's Connor Walsh. He runs a security company out of Billings. Does a lot of work for wealthy clients who want problems to disappear quietly." "Walsh," Sarah repeated. "Same last name as the county assessor, who told me my payment disappeared." "Jennifer Walsh is Connor's sister," Bradley confirmed. "And before you ask, yes, she's been getting a lot of consulting fees from Marcus Blackwood's various companies. All perfectly legal, of course." Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place like bullets sliding into a chamber. "So Blackwood pays Jennifer to make my tax payment disappear, then pays Connor to terrorize me with a drugged bear, all to force me to sell my ranch." "That's what it looks like," Martinez agreed. "But proving it in court is going to be another matter entirely." Bradley studied the footage for several more minutes, his jaw working as he processed what they'd discovered. "Sarah, I need you to copy all of this footage to external drives, multiple copies, and I need you to do it right now." "Why? What's wrong?" "Because in about 6 hours, Blackwood's lawyers are going to show up with a court order declaring your property a public safety hazard. They'll seize everything as evidence, including this computer system. If we don't preserve this footage, now it's going to disappear forever." Sarah's hands flew over the keyboard, copying files to every USB drive she could find in the barn. But as she worked, she heard the sound of vehicles approaching outside. "Tom," she called softly. "We've got company." Bradley drew his sidearm and moved to the barn door, peering through a crack in the wood. 3 black SUVs had pulled up to Sarah's house, and men in expensive suits were climbing out. Even in the darkness, Bradley could see the gleam of legal documents in their hands. "They're early," he muttered. "Martinez, get on the radio and call for backup. Tell them we need at least 4 units out here right now." "Copy that, Sheriff." But before Martinez could reach his radio, the barn door exploded inward. Connor Walsh stepped through the opening with 2 other men, all of them armed with military-grade weapons that made Bradley's service pistol look like a toy. "Sheriff Bradley," Walsh said with mock courtesy, "you and your deputy need to step away from that computer." "Like hell we do." Bradley kept his weapon trained on Walsh, but Sarah could see the sweat beading on his forehead. 3 against 2, and the other side had superior firepower. "We have a court order for the immediate seizure of all electronic equipment on this property," one of Walsh's companions said, producing official-looking documents. "You're interfering with a lawful seizure." "That court order isn't valid until morning," Bradley shot back. "And I'm conducting a criminal investigation into the illegal release of a dangerous animal." Walsh smiled, and the scar on his cheek pulled his expression into something grotesque. "Sheriff, you're out of your jurisdiction. This property has been declared a federal wildlife preserve as of 1 hour ago. We're operating under Fish and Game Authority now." Sarah's blood turned to ice. A federal designation would override local law enforcement completely, and it would give Blackwood's people carte blanche to do whatever they wanted on her property. "That's impossible," she said. You can't just declare someone's private property a federal preserve overnight. Emergency Environmental Protection Order, Walsh's companion explained. Signed by a federal judge in Helena based on evidence of critical habitat disruption and public safety concerns following tonight's bear incident. The man held up an official seal that looked genuine, even though Sarah knew it had to be fake. Or worse. Maybe it was real, purchased like everything else in Blackwood's campaign to steal her land. Now step away from the computer, Walsh repeated, his weapon never wavering. Bradley looked at Sarah, and she saw resignation in his eyes. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and apparently out of legal options. In a few minutes, all evidence of Blackwood's crimes would disappear into the same black hole that had swallowed her tax payment. But Sarah had spent her entire life on this ranch, and she knew every inch of it better than any outsider ever could, including the fact that her grandfather had installed a secondary power panel in the barn's loft, one that could kill electricity to the entire building at the flip of a switch. "Tom," she said quietly, "when I say now, hit the deck." Before anyone could react, Sarah dove for the ladder leading to the loft. Walsh's weapon swung toward her, but she was already climbing, moving with the desperate speed of someone fighting. For her life. "Sarah, no!" Bradley shouted. She reached the power panel and yanked the main breaker just as Walsh's first shot splintered the wood next to her head. The barn plunged into absolute darkness, and Sarah heard the sound of men cursing and stumbling in the sudden blackness. "Now!" she screamed. Bradley and Martinez dropped to the barn floor as Sarah leaped from the loft, landing hard on a pile of hay bales. Her ankles screamed. 3 days later, Sarah sat in a secure conference room in the Hart Senate office building, watching through bulletproof glass as protesters filled the National Mall. Signs reading "Justice for Sarah" and "End Corporate Corruption" stretched. As far as the eye could see, while news helicopters circled overhead like mechanical buzzards documenting the largest grassroots demonstration Washington had seen in decades. 47 million views became 400 million overnight, Congresswoman Maria Santos said, reviewing her tablet as she prepared for the hearing. "Your story has become a symbol of everything people hate about the system. Corporate bullies, corrupt officials, and politicians who sell out working families." Sarah barely recognized herself in the woman staring back from the mirror across the room. 3 days of preparation with congressional lawyers had transformed her from a desperate rancher into something more dangerous, a witness who couldn't be bought, intimidated, or discredited. "Are you ready for this?" Santos asked. "Blackwood's legal team has brought in the best defense money can buy. They're going to try to destroy your credibility, paint you as an unstable woman seeking attention, maybe even claim you staged the whole thing." "Let them try," Sarah replied. "I've got something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth." Agent Torres entered the room with a grim expression that immediately put Sarah on edge. "We have a problem. Marcus Blackwood posted bail 2 hours ago." Santos looked up sharply. "That's impossible. Federal judges don't grant bail in conspiracy cases involving threats of violence." "They do, when the defendant's legal team argues that the charges are politically motivated and the evidence was obtained through illegal surveillance," Torres replied. "Judge Morrison ruled that Blackwood poses no flight risk, given his business ties to the community." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. "Judge Morrison? Let me guess. Another one of Blackwood's donations?" "Morrison's re-election campaign received $200,000 from Blackwood's Political Action Committee last year," Torres confirmed, "plus another $50,000 for the new courthouse renovation project." "Jesus Christ," Santos muttered. "How deep does this corruption go?" Before Torres could answer, her radio crackled with urgent chatter. "Agent Torres, we have multiple vehicles approaching the Capitol building. Looks like a coordinated convoy." Through the window, Sarah could see black SUVs weaving through the crowd of protesters with the aggressive precision of a military operation. But these weren't federal vehicles. They had the sleek, expensive look of private security. "That son of a bitch," Torres growled, reaching for her sidearm. "He's making a play right here, right now." The lead SUV stopped directly in front of the Capitol steps, and Marcus Blackwood emerged like a conquering general reviewing his troops. He wore an immaculate charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, and his silver hair caught the morning sun with the calculated perfection of a political photo op. But it was the crowd's reaction that made Sarah's blood run cold. The protesters who had gathered to support her began backing away as Blackwood's security team spread out across the plaza. These weren't the courthouse rent-a-cops Sarah was used to. They moved with the disciplined coordination of former military operators who'd learned their trade in places where human life was cheap. He's not just posting bail, Sarah realized. He's making a statement, showing everyone that he's still in control. Santos was already on her phone with Capitol Police, but Sarah could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Congressional security was designed to handle tourists and political protesters, not a paramilitary operation led by a billionaire with nothing left to lose. Blackwood began climbing the Capitol steps, flanked by his legal team and security detail. With each step, he looked more like a man attending his own coronation than someone facing federal conspiracy charges. "We need to move you to a secure location," Torres said, but Sarah was already walking toward the door. "No, I'm not hiding from this bastard anymore. Sarah, he's got 20 armed men out there, and I've got 400 million people watching on live television. Which one of us do you think has more power right now?" Sarah walked out of the conference room and headed straight for the main corridor leading to the hearing chamber. Behind her, she could hear Torres and Santos arguing about security protocols and threat assessments, but their voices seemed distant and unimportant. What mattered was the choice in front of her: cower in a safe room while Blackwood paraded his impunity in front of the world, or meet him head-on and prove that some things couldn't be bought or intimidated. She reached the main hallway just as Blackwood and his entourage entered from the opposite end. For a moment, the two sides faced each other across 50 yards of marble floor like gunfighters at high noon, while tourists and staffers scattered for cover. Blackwood's smile was the cold, predatory expression of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Sarah, I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk before the hearing." "We're talking now," she replied, walking slowly toward him. With each step, she felt something shifting inside her. The fear and desperation of the past months hardening into something harder and more dangerous. "You look tired," Blackwood said with mock concern. "This whole experience must be very stressful. Fighting the federal government, dealing with media attention, worrying about the safety of your friends and neighbors. Wouldn't it be easier to just walk away?" "From what? My home? My family's legacy? My responsibility to expose what you've done? From a fight you cannot win." Blackwood's voice dropped to a whisper, but in the marble corridor, every word carried, like a gunshot. "You think this hearing matters? You think congressional testimony changes anything? I've been buying politicians longer than you've been alive, Sarah. This is just another cost of doing business." Sarah stopped walking when they were 10 feet apart, close enough to see the calculation in his eyes. "You're wrong about one thing, Marcus. This isn't about politics or business anymore. It's about justice." Blackwood laughed, the sound echoing off the walls like breaking glass. "Justice? You want to talk about justice? Let me tell you about justice." He gestured toward the windows overlooking the National Mall. "Those protesters out there think they're supporting you, but they're really just entertainment. Something to make them feel good about themselves while they go back to their comfortable lives. At least they're willing to stand up for what's right. They're sheep, Sarah, just like you. You think because you have some grainy security footage and a viral video that you can bring down an empire I've spent decades building? You think the system will suddenly start working just because you're pure of heart?" Sarah felt anger building in her chest, but it was clean anger, the kind that burned away doubt and fear, leaving only clarity. I think you're scared. I think, for the first time in your life, you can't buy your way out of consequences, and it terrifies you. Blackwood's mask of civility slipped completely, revealing the rage underneath. You have no idea what you've unleashed. I built this system, Sarah. I own the judges, the politicians, the bureaucrats. I own the media companies that are broadcasting your little sob story. You think you're fighting me? You're fighting the entire structure of American power. Then, maybe it's time for that structure to fall. The words hung in the air between them like a declaration of war. Sarah saw something flicker in Blackwood's eyes, surprise, maybe even respect, before the cold calculation returned. You know what your problem is, Sarah. You still believe in fairy tales. You think good triumphs over evil, that the little guy can beat the system. That truth and justice matter more than money and power. But this isn't a movie. This is the real world, where good people lose every single day. Maybe. But sometimes they take the bad guys down with them. Before Blackwood could respond, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the corridor. Agent Torres appeared with a full tactical team, their weapons drawn and their faces grim. "Mr. Blackwood," Torres called out, "you're under arrest for violation of federal bail conditions and conspiracy to intimidate a federal witness." Blackwood's security team tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons, but their boss held up a hand to stop them. He knew that a shootout in the Capitol building would destroy any remaining chance of beating the charges through legal maneuvering. "Agent Torres," he said smoothly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm simply here to attend a congressional hearing, as is my right as an American citizen. Your bail conditions specifically prohibited any contact with witnesses or their associates. The conversation we just recorded violates those conditions." Torres held up a small recording device, and Sarah realized the agent had been listening to every word of their confrontation. Blackwood's attempt at intimidation had just become evidence in a federal case. "You son of a bitch!" Blackwood snarled, his composure finally cracking completely. "You think this changes anything? I'll be out on bail again before dinner. I'll tie this case up in court for decades. I'll destroy everyone you care about piece by piece until—" "Until what?" Sarah interrupted. "Until you prove my point about who you really are." Blackwood lunged toward her, his face twisted with rage, but Torres's tactical team was already moving. They had him on the ground and cuffed before he could take 2SE. By dawn, Chen Ranch had become the center of a media circus that stretched from Montana to Manhattan. News vans lined the county road like mechanical vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward a sky painted in shades of justice and retribution. Sarah stood on what remained of her front porch, watching reporters interview her neighbors while FBI agents in windbreakers cataloged evidence with the methodical precision of surgeons. Special Agent Diana Torres approached through the chaos, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense expression. At 38, Torres had built her reputation dismantling corruption networks that thought money could buy immunity from federal law. "Ms. Chen," Torres said, extending a hand that gripped like a vice. "I've been reviewing your live stream. Footage, 47 million views and counting. That's more than most Super Bowl commercials." Sarah managed a tired smile. She hadn't slept in 26 hours, running on nothing but coffee and the adrenaline of survival. "I never thought I'd go viral for getting threatened at gunpoint." "Sometimes the best evidence comes from the most unexpected sources," Torres replied. "Your phone recorded everything we need to build a federal conspiracy case. Blackwood's people made a critical error when they threatened you on camera. What happens now?" Torres gestured toward the barn, where agents were loading computer equipment into evidence containers. "Now we follow the money. Blackwood's operation involves wire, fraud, conspiracy, bribery, and violation of federal wildlife protection laws. But we need to move fast. His lawyers are already working damage control." As if summoned by their conversation, A convoy of Blacktown cars appeared at the ranch's entrance. The lead vehicle bore diplomatic plates, and Sarah felt her stomach drop as she recognized the occupant stepping out. Senator Patricia Holbrook emerged from the car like a queen surveying her domain. Everything about Montana's senior senator screamed political ambition, from her perfectly styled silver hair to the flag pin positioned at the exact optimal angle on her lapel. Behind her came a retinue of aides, lawyers, and what looked like private security. "Oh, hell," Torres muttered. "This just got complicated." Holbrook approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. Her smile was warm enough for the cameras, but never reached her eyes. "Agent Torres," Holbrook said, her voice carrying the folksy cadence that had won her 3 Senate terms. "I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding here." "No misunderstanding, Senator. We're executing federal warrants in a corruption investigation." "Corruption?" Holbrook's laugh was perfectly calibrated for maximum political effect. "Agent Torres, Marcus Blackwood is one of Montana's most respected business leaders. He's donated millions to environmental causes and rural development programs. Surely there's been some mistake." Sarah stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. The only mistake was thinking he could get away with it. Holbrook's gaze fixed on Sarah with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. "Ms. Chen, isn't it? I'm so sorry about your difficulties. But you have to understand, sometimes progress requires sacrifice. Your ranch sits on land that could benefit thousands of Montana families through responsible development. By responsible development, you mean luxury vacation homes for California tech executives? I mean economic growth, jobs, tax revenue, the kind of prosperity that lifts entire communities." Holbrook moved closer, lowering her voice to a confidential whisper. "Sarah, I've reviewed your situation. Your ranch is drowning in debt, your infrastructure is failing, and you're fighting a battle you simply cannot win. But there's another way." "I'm listening," Sarah said, though every instinct screamed danger. Holbrook smiled, sensing opportunity. "The federal government is always looking for ways to preserve Montana's natural heritage. What if your ranch became part of a new national monument? You'd be compensated fairly, your family's legacy would be protected forever, and you'd be remembered as a conservation hero. And Blackwood gets to develop the surrounding land without any environmental opposition," Sarah shot back. "Mr. Blackwood's development projects would create thousands of jobs and generate millions in tax revenue. Sometimes compromise serves the greater good." Agent Torres stepped between them. "Senator, are you seriously proposing a federal land grab to benefit a criminal defendant?" "I'm proposing a solution that serves everyone's interests," Holbrook replied smoothly. "Ms. Chen gets compensation and recognition, the federal government acquires valuable conservation land, and the people of Montana benefit from economic development. Everyone wins." Sarah felt the familiar sensation of powerful people trying to manipulate her life, but this time she wasn't standing alone in her kitchen facing impossible odds. This time she had federal agents, media attention, and most importantly, evidence of crimes that couldn't be wished away with political double-talk. "Senator," she said quietly, "you can take your compromise and shove it up your ass." Holbrook's composure cracked for just an instant, revealing something cold and calculating underneath the political veneer. "Ms. Chen, you're making a serious mistake. I have significant influence over federal law enforcement budgets, and Agent Torres's career could suffer if she pursues politically motivated prosecutions." Torres stepped forward, her hand instinctively moving toward her sidearm. "Did you just threaten a federal agent in the middle of a criminal investigation?" "I simply stated facts about political reality," Holbrook replied. "The Justice Department serves at the pleasure of elected officials, and elected officials serve the people. Sometimes individual interests must yield to broader concerns." "Jesus Christ," Sarah breathed. You're all in it together, aren't you? Blackwood buys the county officials. The county officials manipulate the records, and you provide federal cover for the whole operation. Holbrook's eyes narrowed. That's a very serious accusation, Ms. Chen. Defamation lawsuits can be quite expensive for people who can't afford proper legal representation. But before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was Washington, D.C. Sarah Chen? The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Yes? This is Congresswoman Maria Santos, chair of the House Judiciary Committee. I've been watching your live stream footage, and I think we need to talk. Sarah put the call on speaker, and Holbrook's face went pale as the Congresswoman's voice filled the morning air. Ms. Chen, based on what I've seen in your video evidence, I'm calling an emergency session of the Judiciary Committee to investigate potential violations of federal conspiracy laws, civil rights violations, and abuse of government authority. I want you to testify before Congress about what happened here. Congresswoman Santos, Holbrook interjected, her political instincts kicking in. Surely this is a matter for local authorities. Senator Holbrook, I didn't realize you were there. Santos's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut glass. How convenient. I'll be very interested to hear your testimony about your relationship with Marcus Blackwood's business interests. Sarah watched Holbrook's carefully constructed facade crumble in real time. The senator's aides were already whispering frantically into their phones, no doubt trying to coordinate damage control with her campaign staff. Maria, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is thinking that corruption becomes legal when it's done by powerful people, Santos shot back. Ms. Chen, are you willing to testify under oath about everything that happened here? Sarah looked around at the circus surrounding her ranch. The FBI agents, the reporters, the politicians scrambling to control a narrative that had already spiraled beyond their influence. 6 months ago, she'd been a failing rancher facing foreclosure. Now she was about to become the star witness in a congressional investigation that could bring down some of the most powerful people in Montana. Yes, she said firmly, I'll testify. Excellent. My staff will be in touch with travel arrangements. Agent Torres, I assume the FBI will be cooperating fully with our investigation? Absolutely, Congresswoman. We're preparing a comprehensive case file for your committee. Perfect. Senator Holbrook, I look forward to seeing you in the witness chair as well, under oath, of course. The line went dead, leaving an uncomfortable silence broken only by the distant sound of reporters shouting, questions and camera shutters clicking. Holbrook stood frozen for a moment, probably calculating the political damage of being dragged before a congressional committee to explain her relationship with a man now facing federal conspiracy charges. Then her survival instincts kicked in. Agent Torres, I want you to know that I had no knowledge of any illegal activities. If Marcus Blackwood violated federal law, then he should face the full consequences. Montana's people deserve leaders who uphold the highest ethical standards. The speed of Holbrook's betrayal was breathtaking, but not surprising. Politicians were like water. They always flowed toward the path of least resistance, abandoning their allies the moment the current changed direction. Of course, Senator, Torres replied dryly. I'm sure your testimony will be very illuminating. As Holbrook and her entourage retreated to their vehicles, the House Judiciary Committee hearing chamber felt like a cathedral of justice, its soaring ceiling and marble columns designed to remind everyone present that they stood in the temple of American democracy. But as Sarah took her seat at the witness table, facing a semicircle of congressmen and women whose political careers hung in the balance of what she was about to say, the room felt more like a battlefield. Behind her, the gallery was packed with reporters, lobbyists, and ordinary citizens who had traveled from across the country to witness what had become the most watched congressional hearing since Watergate. Every major news network was broadcasting, live, and Sarah could see the red lights of cameras tracking her every movement, like predators stalking prey. Congresswoman Santos called the session to order with the gravity of someone who knew that history was being made. The House Judiciary Committee will come to order. We are here today to investigate allegations of federal corruption, conspiracy, and abuse of governmental authority in the matter of Chen Ranch and related criminal activities. At the defense table, Marcus Blackwood's legal team had assembled. Like an army of expensive suits, each lawyer representing a different aspect of his crumbling empire. But their client was notably absent, still in federal custody after his spectacular meltdown in the Capitol corridor the day before. Senator Patricia Holbrook sat at the witness table beside Sarah, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past, weak. Her political instincts had told her to distance herself from Blackwood, but the congressional investigation had revealed financial connections that went back decades. Now she faced the choice between loyalty and survival, and Sarah could see in her eyes which option she'd chosen. "Ms. Chen," Santos began, "please state your name and occupation for the record." "Sarah Chen. I'm a rancher from Montana. 4th generation on the same land." "And how did you first become aware of Marcus Blackwood's interest in your property?" Sarah looked directly into the cameras, knowing that her words would be heard by millions of people who had never set foot on a ranch, but understood what it meant to fight for something you loved. "It started 2 years ago with what seemed like a generous offer to buy my ranch. When I declined, the offers got bigger. When I still said no, the pressure started. Tax assessments that doubled overnight. Permits denied for no reason. Neighbors who'd been friends for decades suddenly treating me like a pariah." "And you believe this was coordinated?" "I believe Marcus Blackwood decided he wanted my land, and when he couldn't buy it, he set out to steal it." A murmur ran through the gallery, and Sarah could see some of the congressmen shifting uncomfortably. These were people who understood political pressure, but what Blackwood had done went beyond politics into something darker. Santos introduced the security footage that had started everything. The grainy images of Connor Walsh and his team dragging an unconscious grizzly bear across Sarah's property. As the video played on screens throughout the chamber, the room fell silent except for the sound of cameras clicking. "Ms. Chen, can you describe what happened the night this footage was taken?" Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, reliving the terror of that night. "I was sitting on my porch when I heard something that didn't belong. When I looked toward the barn, I saw an 800-pound grizzly bear, drugged and confused, swaying, on its feet with a tranquilizer dart hanging from its side. She opened her eyes and looked directly at the cameras. Someone had turned a magnificent wild animal into a weapon, drugged it and dumped it on my property knowing it would either kill me or destroy my home. That bear was as much a victim as I was." The emotion in her voice was raw and genuine, and Sarah could see its impact rippling through the room. These weren't just dry facts being recited. This was a woman describing the night someone tried to murder her with a living weapon. "What happened to the bear?" "It broke through my kitchen window and destroyed most of my house before the tranquilizer finally took full effect. Fish and Game had to put it down because Blackwood's people had injected it with drugs that caused permanent brain damage. They murdered that animal just to terrorize me." Congressman Reynolds, a Republican from Texas who had received significant donations from Blackwood's PAC, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. "Ms. Chen, isn't it possible this was simply a wild animal that wandered onto your property? Montana has a significant grizzly population." Sarah had been prepared for this line of attack. "Congressman, grizzly bears don't wander around with veterinary-grade tranquilizer darts hanging from their flanks. They don't test positive for synthetic drugs that can only be obtained through licensed wildlife management companies. And they certainly don't arrive on the same night that mysterious trucks are captured on security cameras dumping large objects on my property." Reynolds pressed on, clearly following a script prepared by Blackwood's legal team. "But you admit you were facing financial difficulties. Isn't it possible you staged this entire incident to gain public sympathy and avoid foreclosure? The question hung in the air like a slap, and Sarah felt rage building in her chest. But before she could respond, Agent Torres stood up in the gallery. "Congressman, if I may," Torres called out, "the FBI has conducted a thorough investigation of Ms. Chen's claims. We have DNA evidence linking the bear to a wildlife management facility owned by Connor Walsh. We have financial records showing payments from Blackwood's companies to Walsh's security firm. We have testimony from wildlife veterinarians confirming that the drugs found in the bear's system could only have been administered by professionals. The idea that Ms. Chen staged this incident is not just wrong, it's insulting to everyone's intelligence." Reynolds's face reddened, but he had no response to facts delivered by a federal agent under oath. The chamber fell silent as the weight of Torres's testimony settled over the room. Santos turned to Senator Holbrook with the expression of a prosecutor closing in for the kill. "Senator, you received substantial campaign contributions from Mr. Blackwood's political action committees. Did those donations influence your decision to intervene in Ms. Chen's case?" Holbrook straightened in her chair, drawing on decades of political experience to project confidence she clearly didn't feel. "Congresswoman Santos, I received donations from many constituents who support my pro-business agenda. I had no knowledge of any illegal activities." "Senator, we have recordings of you threatening Agent Torres's career if she pursued the investigation. We have phone records showing multiple calls between your office and Blackwood's attorneys during the critical 48-hour period when his federal wildlife preserve order was being processed. Are you telling this committee that those communications were coincidental?" "I was simply trying to protect Montana's economic interests by helping a criminal destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses." Sarah watched Holbrook's carefully constructed defense crumble in real time. The senator's political instincts, honed over decades of backroom deals and quid pro quo arrangements, were useless against the brutal simplicity of recorded evidence and documented facts. "I want immunity," Holbrook said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. Santos banged her gavel for order, but Sarah could see the satisfaction in her eyes. They had just landed the big fish. "Senator, are you indicating that you wish to cooperate with this investigation in exchange for prosecutorial consideration?" "I'm saying that Marcus Blackwood is a dangerous man who corrupted everyone around him, and I was as much a victim as Ms. Chen." Sarah nearly laughed at the absurdity of Holbrook comparing herself to someone who'd been terrorized with a weaponized bear, but she kept her expression neutral. Let the senator hang herself with her own words. "Go on," Santos prompted. "Blackwood didn't just buy influence, he owned it. Judges, county officials, federal bureaucrats, even some of my Senate colleagues. He had a network that could make problems disappear, evidence vanish, and people disappear if necessary." "Are you saying he threatened physical violence?" "I'm saying he made it clear that opposition to his interests was bad for your health. Ask Jennifer Walsh how her brother Connor ended up running a security firm despite being dishonorably discharged from the Army for assault. Ask Judge Morrison why he suddenly ruled in favor of so many developers after his son got that construction contract he wasn't qualified for." Each revelation hit the chamber like a bombshell, and Sarah could see reporters frantically taking notes as decades of corruption spilled out in real time. Holbrook was burning down the entire network to save herself, and the flames were spreading faster than anyone could contain them. "Senator," Santos said carefully, "are you prepared to provide names, dates, and documentation to support these allegations?" "I have files," Holbrook said, her voice growing stronger as she committed to her betrayal. "Records of payments, communications, meetings. Blackwood kept detailed records because he believed they made him untouchable. He never imagined someone would turn them against him." Sarah felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and disgust watching Holbrook destroy her co-conspirators. This wasn't justice. It was just one corrupt politician sacrificing others to save her own skin. But if it brought down Blackwood's entire network, Sarah could live with the moral complexity. Where are these files? A year later, Sarah Chen stood on the rebuilt porch of her family's ranch house, watching the morning sun paint the Montana mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The kitchen window that had been shattered by an 800-pound grizzly now looked out over pastures that stretched twice as far as they had before, encompassing the land Jim Holcomb had sold her at cost. A gesture of solidarity that had transformed Chen Ranch from a struggling family operation into one of the most successful sustainable ranching operations in the state. The sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the east made her look up, but these weren't news choppers anymore. The media circus had moved on to other stories, leaving behind something more valuable than fame: the quiet satisfaction of work done and justice served. Agent Torres climbed out of the FBI helicopter, followed by a man in an expensive suit who looked distinctly uncomfortable in the rural setting. Sarah recognized him from the news coverage. David Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was the federal prosecutor who had spent the past year dismantling what journalists had dubbed the Blackwood Network. "Sarah," Torres called out, striding across the yard with the confident gait of someone who had closed the biggest case of her career. "Hope you don't mind the surprise visit. David here wanted to deliver some news in person." Sarah walked down from the porch, noting how different Torres looked from the grim federal agent who had first arrived at her ranch. The successful prosecution had earned her a promotion to deputy director of the FBI's public corruption unit, and the satisfaction showed in every line of her face. "Agent Torres, Mr. Chen, welcome to the ranch." David Chen extended a hand, his grip firm despite the obvious discomfort of someone more accustomed to courtrooms than cattle pastures. "Ms. Chen, I wanted to personally thank you for your courage in testifying. Without your willingness to stand up to these criminals, we never would have been able to dismantle their operation." "I had a lot of help," Sarah replied. "What's the final count?" Torres consulted her tablet with the satisfaction of a general reviewing a successful campaign. 47 individuals indicted on federal charges ranging from conspiracy to murder. Marcus Blackwood got life without parole. Connor Walsh got 35 years for the bear attack and attempted murder. Judge Morrison got 20 years for accepting bribes and obstruction of justice. And Senator Holbrook? 15 years despite her cooperation, Chen replied. The judge said that being a victim of corruption doesn't excuse being a perpetrator of it. Her immunity deal only applied to federal charges. The state of Montana is prosecuting her separately for violation of public trust. Sarah nodded, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but at a cost that went beyond the prison sentences. Families had been destroyed, careers ruined, and an entire community's faith in its institutions shattered. "There's something else," Torres said, her expression growing serious. "We found additional evidence in Blackwood's personal files. Sarah, you weren't his first target. Over the past 15 years, he used similar tactics to force out 23 other property owners. Fraudulent tax assessments, environmental harassment, and in at least 3 cases, violence or threats of violence." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Other people went through what I did? Worse, in some cases. A rancher in Wyoming died of a heart attack after armed men broke into his house and terrorized his family. A tribal leader in North Dakota was found, dead in what looked like an accident, but we now believe it was murder. These people had no security cameras, no social media following, no way to fight back." "Jesus Christ." "The only difference," Chen said quietly, "was that when Blackwood came for you, you had the courage to document everything and the stubbornness to never give up. Your refusal to be intimidated didn't just save your ranch. It gave us the evidence. We needed to get justice for all of his victims." Torres handed Sarah a folder thick with legal documents. The federal government is seizing all of Blackwood's assets under racketeering statutes. His total net worth was approximately $4.2 billion. Under the Victim Compensation Act, you're entitled to full restitution for damages to your property, plus punitive damages for the attempted murder. Sarah opened the folder and felt her knees go weak. The settlement amount had more zeros than she'd ever imagined seeing in one place. "This is," she started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what lay before her. "Enough to rebuild not just your ranch, but your entire community," Chen finished. "Blackwood's money came from victims like you. Now it's going back to help repair the damage he caused." Sarah closed the folder, her hands shaking slightly. The money was staggering, but it couldn't bring back the rancher in Wyoming or the tribal leader in North Dakota. It couldn't undo the years of terror that other families had endured without anyone to witness their suffering. "I want to do something with this money," she said quietly. "Something that makes sure this never happens again." "What did you have in mind?" Torres asked. Sarah looked out over her expanded ranch, seeing not just her own success, but the potential for something larger. "A foundation, legal aid for rural property owners facing harassment by developers, security systems and documentation training for people in isolated areas, and a scholarship fund. We need more lawyers, more journalists, more law enforcement officers who understand that justice isn't just for people with money and connections." Torres and Chen exchanged glances, and Sarah could see approval in their expressions. "The Sarah Chen Foundation for Rural Justice," Chen mused. "I like it, and I know some excellent attorneys who would be happy to help set it up pro bono." "There's one more thing," Torres added, pulling out another document. "The grizzly bear that was used to attack you, we traced its origins. It was captured illegally from Glacier National Park, drugged, and held in captivity for 3 weeks. Before the attack, the trauma and drugs destroyed its ability to survive in the wild, which is why it had to be euthanized." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes as she remembered the magnificent animal's confused rage, the way it had thrashed through her kitchen like a prisoner desperate for freedom it would never find. "Fish and Game is naming a new wildlife protection protocol after you," Torres continued. "The Chen Protocol will create federal penalties for anyone who uses wild animals as weapons, and it establishes emergency response procedures for situations like what you faced. The bear deserves to be remembered too," Sarah said. "It was as much a victim as anyone." Already done, the Montana Wildlife Federation is creating the Glacier Memorial Fund in honor of the bear and other animals killed by Blackwood's network. They want you to serve on the board. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her fight to save her ranch had evolved into something much larger, a platform for protecting others who might face similar threats. The helicopter pilot signaled that it was time to leave, and Torres and Chen began walking back across the yard. But Torres stopped and turned back to Sarah. "You know what the best part of this whole case was?" she asked. "What's that?" Watching Marcus Blackwood realize that all his money, all his connections, all his power meant nothing when faced with one person who refused to be afraid. In the end, he was just a bully, and bullies always fall when someone finally stands up to them. As the helicopter lifted off and disappeared into the Montana sky, Sarah walked back to her porch and sat in the chair her grandfather had built by hand 60 years ago. Her phone buzzed with the daily flood of messages from people around the world who had been inspired by her story, but she let them wait. Instead, she opened her laptop and began typing. The Sarah Chen Foundation for Rural Justice was founded on the principle that every person, regardless of their wealth or connections, has the right to defend their home, their family, and their way of life from those who would use power to crush the powerless. 3 hours later, she had written the mission statement for an organization that would outlast any individual victory or defeat. As the sun set behind the mountains that had sheltered 4 generations of her family, Sarah Chen realized that her greatest victory wasn't saving her ranch. It was proving that ordinary people could still defeat extraordinary evil when they found the courage to fight. Her phone rang, interrupting her work. The caller ID showed a number from Washington, D.C. "Sarah, this is Congresswoman Santos. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Congresswoman. What can I do for you?" "Actually, it's what you can do for the country. I'm calling to ask if you'd consider running for the Senate. Montana needs someone who understands that public service means serving the public, not the highest bidder." Sarah looked out over her ranch, seeing the cattle grazing peacefully in the evening light. Then, at her laptop screen, where the Foundation's mission statement waited to be completed. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But Sarah, you've already proven you can stand up to the most powerful interests in the country and win. Imagine what you could accomplish with a platform to fight for everyone facing what you faced." After Santos hung up, Sarah sat in the gathering darkness, weighing the choice before her. She had rebuilt her ranch, secured justice for Blackwoods victims, and created a foundation that would protect others from similar attacks.